Hey guys, I read an obscene amount of Jim Butcher this January, so let's jump into those books, talk about what I liked, what I didn't. Let's talk about the other books I read in January as well. So this is my January wrap-up. I did read 7 novels in January, and most of these I enjoyed a good amount. 6 of these were fantasy. One of these novels was more dark fantasy horror, I think is what I'd probably describe it as mostly. So let's jump straight in with the Jim Butcher books. So I did read 2 Dresden Files books by Jim Butcher this month. These are rereads for me. I have read this series umpteen times before. It was number 7, which is Deadbeat, and number 8, which is Proven Guilty. Now, I'm not going to give you too many spoilers for these books. Obviously, I don't want to ruin anything that happened before these 2 if you've not read the Dresden Files, or if you're only part of the way through Dresden Files, but I really love these books. I think these 2 books are great. Deadbeat book 7 by most people is one of their favourites. They really enjoy Deadbeat, and it is highly rated in the community, and I think that is totally deserved. It has a really great twisty plot. Things get revealed, we get epic climaxes, we get awesome set pieces. It's just a very good book, and it's a wonderfully executed Dresden Files book. Book 8, Proven Guilty, for me is one of the more underrated in the series. I think for a lot of people this is mid-tier, bottom to mid-tier. For me, I love Proven Guilty. I think it is great. I love the setup that it provides for future books. I love the characters we get introduced to. I love the way they are developed. I think Jim Butcher has done a very good job with Proven Guilty. It is one of my favourite Dresden Files books, and certainly one of the ones that I think is most underrated by the Dresden Files fan base. So moving on from the Dresden Files, which I've talked about ad nauseum on this channel, and you can go and see me talk about it all over the place. I love that series. Moving on to the other 2 Jim Butcher books I read in January, and they are both from the Codex Alera series. Codex Alera is a 6-book fantasy series based on sort of the idea of a lost Roman legion combined with an elemental magic system using these creatures called Furies. It's an interesting read. I read Furies of Calderon, the first one, back in November, and this month I picked up book 2 and book 3. So that is Academ's Fury and Curse's Fury. I really love both of these books. I think they were both very good. If I had to rate one above the other, I think I probably preferred Curse's Fury slightly, but I did give both of them 5 stars. All in all, a very good continuation to the series. I think book 2, Academ's Fury, does a good job at planting the seeds for this magic school trope that you often get in books. And it does use that trope, but it also subverts it very well. We don't get the things you'd necessarily expect. There are some slight twists early on where we get a different feel than most of these fantasy magic school tropes that we often discover, especially in YA books. For me, the character development was great. I really liked the threat, the villain that we got in book 2. I think it was done very well. It had some real horrific moments. It felt dangerous and other and scary, and I think that's a very well written villain. I think that we also get introduced to other species and other races. We get introduced to a slightly wider cross section of the world from what we got in book 1. I think that's great, and that actually set up book 3 incredibly well as well. Book 3 goes on with that. It continues. Curse's Fury manages to have a slightly different antagonist, but is one that we've already met in a different situation, and as situations change, we get to see them in a new light, and I think that's very good. All of these books have some political intrigue under the surface. They're about this Roman emperor and how he's trying to manage the other lords of Alera, those who are sort of beneath him but still powerful, still have their own domains. And I think, again, done very well. I am really looking forward to where the series goes. I can see a really good trajectory for where this is going to finish up. And personally for me, I really like that there's a little bit of a time jump between each of these books. Only a couple of years, nothing major, but enough time for our characters to develop a little bit, for things to have happened off screen, but not to seem unwarranted, not to seem like we're just jumping way ahead and they're a completely different person. The jump seems subtle and realistic, and I'm a big fan of that. All in all, I think Codex Alera is going to be a series that I absolutely adore. So far, all 3 entries, 5-star reads. There are the 4 Jim Butcher books I read in January, so it was over 50% of my reading was Jim Butcher, which is a little bit insane. Next up, I want to talk about a self-published YA fantasy. In December, when I didn't do a wrap-up, but in December I did read the first book of the Mage Errant series by John Bierce. The first book is called Into the Labyrinth, and I enjoyed it quite a lot. I gave it 4 stars. It was a very good, fun read. And then in January, I picked up book 2. It's called The Endless Urge. Now, this series follows Hugh, who is at a magic school. It's very much got this magic school trope that I was talking about earlier. And he is, in the first book, he seems to have no ability with magic, or very little ability with magic. He has obviously proven himself in the past to be able to do it, but then is really struggling to work out how to use it. He can't control it. It's just all over the place. And we get a really interesting found family element as he discovers other people who have similar problems in different areas and in different ways. And they very much discover this found family as they develop under the tutelage of a particular tutor in their school. Now, like I said, book 1 I gave 4 stars, I enjoyed. Book 2 I also enjoyed. Again, 4 stars. It wasn't mind-blowing. It's not the best thing I've ever read, but for a self-published fantasy novel, I really, really enjoyed it. I think that if you are looking for that kind of magic school, Harry Potter inspired, maybe slightly more adult version, although I would definitely still put this in the YA category, this might be a series for you. I think it is written very well. I think relationship drama is starting to become more of a part of it as these young teenagers start to grow up and evolve. And I think it is a good series for what it is. Now, YA fantasy, magic school trope isn't necessarily my favourite. It's not something that I long for and yearn for. But if you want more of that in your life, I would suggest giving the Mage Errant series a go. Next up, I want to talk about what is probably the best book that I read in January. It was probably my favourite book I read in January, and this is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. So it's taken me far too long to get to the First Law series. I've never read the First Law before. I haven't read any Abercrombie before, but I have to say that The Blade Itself, book 1 of the First Law trilogy, I absolutely loved. It was all the good things that people say about it, and for me personally, the negatives that people talk about it actually didn't apply quite so much for me. So people say they love the character work and they think Abercrombie's character work is just top tier, and I have to agree. I even loved the characters that I didn't think I'd love that much, and they weren't the ones that people always rave about, but I really, really enjoyed them. I thought they were done very, very well. And the lack of plot that people always seem to talk about, I didn't feel quite as keenly as many people do. I actually thought the plot was interesting. Yes, a lot of it was internal. It was about characters growing and developing. There wasn't huge climactic action scenes, but it was a story that did have a plot, and a plot that I really enjoyed. So all in all, a 5-star read for me. I absolutely adore this book, and I am jumping in, hopefully, to more First Law very, very soon. I do have a review for The Blade Itself. If you haven't seen that, I'll put the link down below in the description, so go have a look for that. And the last book that I read in January was actually this horror book I was talking about. I am not much of a horror reader, but this is an author who has come highly recommended to me. I know that Leslie over at The Nerdy Narrative and She Was Only Evie both love Stephen Graham Jones, and this is the first book of his I've ever read. It is called The Only Good Indians, and as a non-horror reader, I actually really quite enjoyed this book. I think it was done quite well. There was a lot of psychological horror going on. There was a lot of really interesting cultural commentary going on. For me, it wasn't written amazingly. The prose didn't suit me perfectly, but I think it definitely conveyed an atmosphere very well, and it conveyed a culture and an atmosphere that I'm not very aware of, I'm not very related to. It is about Native American culture and the Native American people, and as a Brit, I don't know that much about that. I've not engaged with that massively in the past. It was very interesting for me though, and it was interesting to get a sneak peek into that. But I do think it was written very well, and it built atmosphere and sort of suspense very, very well. The concept of it is a little bit weird, and I don't really know how to describe that without spoiling bits of it, but what I will say is that it is about a group of 4 Native Americans who sneak into a part of the hunting grounds that they shouldn't be in, basically, and the repercussions of that going out for many years after the event. and that's as much as I'm going to give you. But I think it was written very well. Atmosphere was conveyed incredibly well, and I gave it a 4-star read, which, considering I am not a horror reader at all, tells you that if you do love horror, I can totally see this being an absolute home run for you. So there we go. Of my 7 novels I read in January, 5 of them were 5-star reads, which is a bit crazy. 2 4-star reads. No bad books on this list at all. I really enjoyed all of them. It's probably the most positive monthly wrap up I've done in quite a while, where I just really enjoyed everything I read. If you're interested to see what I will be reading next month, or this month now, after the time this comes out, in February, check over here for my February TBR. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe if you want to see more of the content, and go see what I'm reading in February.